Hi, everyone. My name is Rajni. I'm the Executive Director of Yoga Service Council, and today we are talking with Firas Nasr. Pronouns are they, them, and Firas is an activist and an organizer in Washington, D.C. He's kind of a badass, and I've known him for a little bit of time, and it's a privilege to get to know this soul. And so today we're going to talk about Firas. We're going to talk about his story. We're going to talk about all sorts of things. And I think that you will have a chance to really connect with his heart. So Firas, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Rajni.
Of course. So Firas, you're part of the Yoga and Resilience series, and we're talking about, through storytelling, how a person develops these strength and resiliency habits and kind of how they work with the world and how they learned how to work with the world. So just to give us all a little bit of idea, can you chat a little bit about kind of where you grew up, your family structure, any elements of religion or culture that was part of your kind of upbringing?
Yeah, thank you so much for asking. So I was born in Washington, D.C., and born and raised in Washington, D.C., and I'm actually in my childhood room right now. It's absurd what COVID has done to bring us back to the places that we call home and places that we've, lived in for a long time and also have run away from and have taken space from. So it's been a real journey being back here. But I grew up in Fairfax, Virginia, so right outside of DC. And I grew up as I have roots in Lebanon. So both my parents are Lebanese, and I have roots in the Druze community, which is spelled Druze. So the Druze community is a sect of Islam, technically, and it actually has a lot of connections to what we consider now the New Age spirituality movement, in the sense that, people who, and it also has a lot of, similarities and connections to Buddhism. So in the ways that people think about, reincarnation, that's deeply entrenched as a core tenet of the Druze community. Mm-hmm. Also, the idea that, the Druze believe in one God, but believe that you, as an individual, are in constant prayer to God. So unlike Muslims who pray 5 times a day, the Druze are meant to be in constant prayer through action and through being, in some sense, embodying God, which I think as a young person, I didn't really understand what that meant, but as I've grown older and have brought meditation into my practice and brought yoga and other practices as such into my daily practice, it's I've definitely begun to understand what that means and have actually gone back to my Druze roots as a means of connecting deeper with the current practices that I experience and that I work through.
So beautiful. Like I did not know this. This is brand new information to me, and I'm loving it because it's more like now I'm going to Google and try to find out more. And it's like, oh my God, this is great. And so when you were growing up in your family, when you were a child, and you mentioned that you didn't, the philosophy and the tenets of the community, you kind of settled in as you got older. So when you were a child living with your family and such, how did that kind of move into your own experiences within the family and then outside of the family, if any?
Do you mean with the Druze community?
Yeah.
The Druze piece? Yeah, I think, so it's interesting because I think a gift that I really feel so grateful for is that my mom's journey ended up coinciding with mine in so many ways. My mom and dad divorced when I was in 4th grade, so just about like 7 or 8, and after that, my mom went on her own journey of religion and spirituality that I definitely hopped on as well. We both were. My mom was working with this person who introduced her to a healer, and we went to see the healer. And I remember at the time I really had like no inclination or desire towards any of these like healing modalities. I actually thought that they were kind of bogus, and I was like, what is this? Like, I don't want to do this. But I was sitting in front of the healer, I remember, and the healer looked at me and my mom, and she said, "Oh, you both do energy healing together." And instinctively, without blinking an eye, I just nodded and I said, "Yes, we do."
Mm.
And since then, I think my mom and my journey have really been parallel in so many ways. My mom turned back towards Islam throughout a part of my childhood, and I still have my my Quran readings and have a copy of the Quran on my bookshelf. And I used to have a masbaha, or a rosary that I would sit and go through every evening and do my prayers. And then my mom transitioned from that into more of the Druze faith, and that led me to books around the Druze faith and around spirituality within the Druze community. It also led me to question a lot of the cultural practices that seemed so antithetical to how I viewed the Druze faith and community based on what I was reading.
Mm.
And then we both kind of transitioned into more of a spirituality focus. I personally studied Reiki while I was in high school, and my mom was studying what's called theta healing. She was doing a lot of that. I was doing a lot of Reiki. I had the privilege of teaching my mom Reiki, which was a whole other thing. But it was beautiful to see it, just like how our journeys changed and shifted over time as my mom grew as a person. And I think just seeing my mom grow was such an incredible example to me, and really provided me the space where I knew that like if I grew and I changed, that I would still be held and accepted in my family and in my experience, which I think for a lot of queer and trans people is not an experience that they have. And I feel incredibly grateful for that.
Yeah, that's very true. And I can't wait to meet your mom one day, like literally.
Yeah. She's
Hug you both. So it's, your mom being such a key component of your kind of experiences and the envelopment of, practices and everything that, it sounds like there's the development of strength, the development of compassion, the development of this gradual building of resiliency was, a large part of this relationship that you have with your mom. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, and I think it's interesting now to be processing, like now as I'm 26 years old, and I've been doing therapy for a couple of years as a part of my practice. To me, I think like it's such an integral part of my practice, really. And to be processing a lot of the like generational trauma that that is not only present in my own experience, but that's also present in like previous generations' experiences. That is such a journey, to be reflecting on my own spiritual practice and its connection to my generational experience, as well as simultaneously processing generational trauma that I've experienced. And to hold those both at once is such a powerful experience of acknowledging that like we can be so much more than what we allow ourselves to be.
That's beautiful. And I think that's really important for everybody to hear from different people in different ways. So would you be comfortable talking a little bit about the generational trauma that you've been kind of, has been part of your journey working through and in whichever way you're comfortable?
Sure. Yeah. I honestly think it's quite beautiful to be like processing it. I think that both my mom and I are processing our own like the traumas that we've experienced together in separate ways. You know, we process them separately, but then also have this like, um, I'm very grateful for a relationship with my mom in which like I can share with her those processes. Um, yeah, I think just thinking about, um, I think there's a lot of like generational trauma that also like sits when in my relationship with my dad, in relationships with, and just relationships with men in general, who are like older men who had been in my life, of just like abandonment and neglect, and what and how those transpired into the ways in which both I developed like intense trauma, and then also the ways that I developed like a more keen sense or a more inclination towards emotional intelligence, which I think is like, in some senses, it's like the like blessing in disguise that comes with trauma, or that came with trauma for me personally, of just like being able, having the privilege to develop a higher sense of emotional intelligence because of traumatic experiences, through abandonment and neglect.
Yeah. And I think, inherently, as I've talked to so many different people representative of different communities, and just, thinking back on my own stuff, there's things that come up in life that are so difficult. It's like, even if you feel that you're alone, or even if you feel that you don't have support, you still deal with it. You have to deal with things, and they just keep coming. And I think inherently, just in the dealing with them in different ways, there are some resiliency habits that develop, which is, whether it's being able to take a step back and observe what's happening emotionally, whether it's reaching out to a therapist. I mean, there's so many different things that can come from that. So, as you've moved through all of this and working with, abandonment and neglect, and really, moving in and through these emotions, are there any specific, I want to say, memories that you have in which perhaps you felt that in your body, the feeling of abandonment, the feeling of neglect? Just curious to see if there's a memory that's there.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Thank you for asking this question. I also like, I think memories wise, I think the feeling of abandonment and neglect is so real in the pit of my stomach. I think just like the feeling of intense anxiety, and feeling like I won't be loved again, or I won't find, um, I won't find a way to be like valid, or I'm not worthy, or I'm not enough. I think has permeated, so I mean, it permeates all aspects of your life in so many different ways, all aspects of my life, definitely. um and I think that, it's something that I've had also the privilege to be able to step back and to see it, and to work through, to breathe through it and work through it, has also been just like such a journey on its own, of like, what does that look like. I'll also name that, like, I think part of this like generational trauma also, it does come back to identity, and it does come back to my Druze community as well. I think, one, to name that, like, as immigrants, um, there is an immigrant mentality of constantly like having to struggle in order to get somewhere. And that's something that is just like so hard ingrained, not only in us, but also in our parents and in our grandparents, as they, have worked so hard to get to where they are. And I think specifically with the Druze community, the Druze have, for generations have had to hide because of our identity, in like various areas around the world, but specifically, in like Lebanon, Palestine, Syria, like there have been like bursts of persecution towards the Druze community. So for us, there is like an ingrained crisis mentality and mode that like we enter into so quickly. And I think that for, for my family and just for my community in general, there is that generational trauma that we carry of like having to be in crisis to be valid or to be worthy or to be seen. And, I actually realized that a few years ago in a meditation, and through journaling about it afterwards. And just to get to a place where I acknowledged that like I didn't actually need to be in crisis in order to be seen or valid as a human has radically changed the way that I see the world and the way that I operate in it. And it's a gift because I can share that back with my mom too. And then now she's also in that space too. And we just like, now we experience the world differently. So like we're co-creating that together and we're co-healing together in that way, which is beautiful.
Yeah, I was going to say it sounds like just the relationship with all of it, and you're right, immigrant parents when you come to the States. Wow, such a different lens. It's a completely different lens, and it always starts off with I am different. We are different. This is unknown land. We have to make sure that we are safe. And that safety comes money, emotional, mental, physically, all of these different arenas. Totally get that. My parents are also immigrants as well from India. And I'm going to be 40 in a couple of years. No, 3 years. I got 3 years. Almost. And I'm still working with some of that resistance and friction that comes up when you're faced with the possibility of freedom. The freedom that you're safe and that you're okay and that you can create your life.
Yeah. And I think that that's something I'm sure that we'll be working through our whole lives. And to me personally, like that feels like a privilege to be able to, not only to be able to be at a place where I get to work through it, but also to have had the privilege to be in a space where you experience crisis and know really like viscerally what that feels like. But then to be able to come to a place where you're like, I acknowledge that crisis can exist and I give myself permission to be safe, whole, worthy enough here.
Love it.
And yeah, to get to that space, I think is just so, it's powerful and it's deeply moving.
And I'm not sure if, in the places, like if I was a girl growing up in India, I'm not sure if I would have been able to have these types of experiences that allowed me to kind of teeter-totter between two different worlds, two different mindsets, two different ways to relate to the external environment and the internal environment. Definitely. I may have, but honestly, like my parents are from the village in India. Like unless I had made some dramatic turns, I'm not sure what would happen. So that makes total sense. So let's move a little bit into your community right now and how you identify yourself as where your heart is, where your soul is. And let's talk about, Firas, like your identity as you represent yourself, as you feel today.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, thanks for asking. When you were talking about that and when you're asking this question, it really made me think back to like when I first came out. I realized that a lot of my coming out process was going to be about carving out space for chosen family and giving myself permission to let go of like, blood connections, just because they're blood connections, and creating space, for an abundance of people and experiences in which I feel held, seen, heard, worthy, and I think I feel so grateful that, in this, like today, I have dear chosen family members all over the world whom I can call home, and it makes me reflect on just like how far I've come in my own journey as a genderqueer person, and how I really believe that like our internal experience is reflected in our external reality, and vice versa, that like our external reality provides us data, like you say, Rajni, like provides us data that we can use to understand our internal like experience. And I really do believe like in seeing, I feel so grateful for all of the incredible humans around me who nourish and hold me in my process. And I also know that like I did that. I manifested, I created space to have those individuals in my life. And I've created the circumstances where I've been able to manifest that, not only here in Fairfax or in DC, but also all over the world, in Berlin, in California, in Mexico, in Canada, wherever, in Denmark. I mean, just like so many places where I know that like I can call someone up and know that I will be at home, because I have created home within me.
And so do you remember the first time that you felt that?
Ooh, the first time.
Or maybe the first memory that comes up that you remember and recall. Maybe it wasn't the first time, but maybe it's a memory of a person where you were like, oh, this feels like home, and you're not my blood relation.
Yeah, wow. I think it's like always really interesting in like reflection on things like this, because sometimes I'll feel that way and I'll feel a little cognitive dissonance, especially in hindsight, because I'll be like, wait, like that was actually a toxic relationship, but but no, I think
It doesn't matter the end result of that relationship.
I would say though, I think that I've definitely felt that. I felt that in so many experiences growing up, especially like as a child. I mean, I was lucky to, to have a parent who really reflected me in that way. But I also think that probably one of the one of the first people who comes to mind is my mom's cousin's wife. Her name is Auntie Dehab, and I remember the first time I called her, I was calling my uncle for some help on, like, I don't know, it was like math or science. And she hung up on me. She didn't know who I was. But then I called back and she picked up the phone and we talked for a little bit, and we ended up going and visiting. I remember it was like in 2003. We went and visited them they were living in Chicago at the time. And Auntie Dehab and I became like inseparable, just best friends. And every time now we see each other, we always go and get a coffee together and sit and have our own time. Even if like the family is doing their thing, we always have just like our own time. And I feel like so grateful for that space that we have, and just like the deep amount of sharing that we have. She's really the first person I came out to in my family.
Wow, that's powerful. That's very powerful.
Yeah, and she's also someone who comes from a village in Lebanon, who grew up, quite poor, and came to the US and has a PhD. And not to talk about like, it's not a requirement for you to have this story where you become successful, by any means, because still the choice to change and to create space for growth is a choice that we all make and have. And there are so many of us who are in successful positions who have like achieved capitalism, who are still very unhappy. Mm-hmm. And that's valid and also important to acknowledge, I think, here. But definitely I think about my sixth grade teacher, Mrs. Boggs, who I also felt such a deep connection to, and who really inspired me to like to be to be an activist. Really, I think she was the person who told me that she believed in me and believed that I have the power to change the world as I wish. And like I still, when I graduated high school, she gave me a children's book with a note in it, and I still have it on my bookshelf, to reflect on just the ways in which people showed me that they, not only that they care, but that they like had my back and believed in me.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's beautiful. And it seems like, it was always that relationships, driven by relationships, the
Yeah.
ability of coming to who you are and what you love and your role in this world. And the Jews community, the philosophies and their spiritual practice they hold, the acceptance of going to therapy, this magnificent relationship with your mother, and just
Yeah.
being able to have such a deep support structure with their chosen family. Like these are all the building blocks that have just created kind of, and as it's yoga and resilience series, so I'm always going to bring it back to the building of the strength and the compassion and the relationship with yourself. And that's beautiful. So you are, just like you mentioned, you're an activist and you're an organizer. So let's chat a little bit about that. Like what if there's a few things that, what are the few things that fire you up from a place of like action? And then what are some of the things that keep you up at night from a place of anxiety?
Yeah, so I'll just first start by saying like none of us are free until we're all free. And every cause that activists and organizers are working on the ground is a cause to believe in and to stand behind, even if I don't understand it fully, even if I haven't done all of the reading and know all the like history about it. I can trust the people who are on the ground because they know what they're talking about, and they are there witnessing and doing the work. And I stand by them so strongly. I mean, I think we look at like the defund the police movement, for example, which is like happening now, that's led by the movement for Black Lives and Black Lives Matter. Even if I personally don't understand what that looks like or means, even if I personally like have had positive experiences with police officers, which personally I haven't, but just saying like in general, like then I can still hold those experiences as true and valid and acknowledge that I don't need to be centered in this experience or process because it's not about me. And I can trust the organizers that are on the ground that are centering themselves in this work because it is about them. And I think that for me, a lot of the work in organizing has been, and a lot of the gratifying work has been like, what does it look like for me to create community and release control in this process so that we can create a more stable experience for all of us? I really think that like, as we work in ourselves to release control, we do actively create stability in the world. And that's something that organizing has taught me so clearly, that like as you start delegating tasks or delegating work, as you like create the world that we want to see through community, we're able to build the structures of like stable environments and communities. I think things that keep me up at night are like, if I'm being completely honest right now, the things that keep me up at night are like doing the work. Because I really believe in the work, and the work is a lot. Like there's a lot of work to do. And I think that's in part rooted in my own work that I need to do to delegate more and to be able to create, again, to create the infrastructure that allows us all to live like thriving lives. And that's a process.
Process for sure. And I was going to, my other question, but you answered it already, was, the element of there's, the Black Lives and Black Lives Matter movement, and knowing and trusting the organizations that are moving into this field because they're living that, they've lived into that, they moved into that in their own way. and that was part of what, I wanted to ask you, is like, how do you relate to that movement right now? And I think you answered it. It's like, no one is free until we're all free. And I think that's really important. I mean, we hear that phrase, but like I said, I always go back to hearing it from different people all the time, I think is what makes a difference. So when you look at, your community, I think you've mentioned that. Well, let me take it to another question. So when meditation came, and I'm going to step away a little bit from the activism, then I'm going to go right back into it. But when you look at the meditation practices that you've had, which, its relationship in some shape, way, or form from the Jewish community and however that came about, what would you say that a practice like meditation, or a spiritual practice, whatever you want to say, what do you feel that has given you the most when it comes to the development of your own strength? What traits, what practices within it?
Yeah, that's a really great question. Thanks for asking. I think for me, my meditation practice has really, it really connects back to this theory that I was introduced to, actually, when I graduated from high school. I spent 2 weeks. I just sat down and wrote 50,000 words, which is equivalent to a novel, for example. And it was about my relationship with my dad. And I was talking with my aunt about it, who's an executive coach. And she was like, oh, this reminds me of this theory of adult development. You should read about it. It's a theory written by Robert Keegan at Harvard University. And the theory is what's called the subject-object theory. So it talks about, the ways in which when we are growth through development happens when we are able to see as object what we are subject to. And he talks through the various levels of adult development that he theorizes are present in adults. And I have several of his books, and I think meditation for me is very much also about subject and object. It's about giving for me, what it has given me is the space to see as object what I have been subject to, and to constantly be doing that process of stepping back, unfolding layers that allow me to see myself and to see the world more and more as it is, without judgment, and just in the present moment.
Thank you. Love it. I love how you describe things. I just love it. And so, and as this relates to your activist and, your organizer role, I mean, I can make assumptions, obviously, about how that kind of sinks into it and informs your role as an activist, as an organizer. But is there anything you want to add to that and its impact on how you relate to the outside world with this way?
Yeah, definitely. So I think for me, it's definitely given me the space to understand more the place that we are at within organizing and activism. I think that, for one, as organizers, I think that we are going through a healing journey ourselves as organizers, but just also as a collective community. We have experienced collective trauma, and we are working through healing that trauma together. And we see different people along the different, the trajectory of healing trauma is, I think, very easily applied to the trajectory of creating collective liberation. And when you look at where we are at, when you look at, for example, the Me Too movement, which is such a vital movement for justice around sexual violence, you see the anger and pain that is coming out of people like me who have experienced sexual violence. And we also recognize that is just one part of the trajectory of collective healing. and of individual healing. Like the anger and the like re-traumatizing is part of that, but then like we need accountability. We need God, what's it called? Yeah, accountability in the sense of like justice, you know, restorative justice and accountability if we're aligning with our values. And then we need mechanisms for healing. We need joy, we need power, we need passion. And all of that is stuff that still has to happen. That like the Me Too movement doesn't live in a vacuum. You know, it doesn't live in just like our trauma and anger. Like we need to like jumping to these next steps takes courage and takes will, not only on the side of the people who are oppressed, but also on the side of the oppressors. So I think just like that, the piece of like subject and object has given me the like space to really acknowledge the ways in which my own personal trajectory of healing can also be seen throughout like our collective healing process. And I think also, you know, so after the, as you may know, you know, 49 individuals were massacred on a dance floor during the Pulse nightclub shooting. And shortly after, I started an organization called Work for Peace, WERK. That's like work.
Love
All
it.
y'all there. And that organization really centers dance protest as a modality for like expressing joy and liberation in the movement for social justice. And I think that transmuting our anger, which is so valid, into joy, into creating the world that we want to see, can happen in so many different ways. There are so many different ways to create healing. I think dance is definitely one of them, and to be able to like create spaces and to be part of those spaces of like healing through dance and movement, as our bodies are consistently ascribed with political and social narratives, to be able to like step into a space where we see those political and social narratives as object rather than be subject by them, takes the work of dance, takes the work of healing, of joy, of power, that I strongly believe in bringing into our movement. So I think that's yeah.
I just want to like squeeze you right now. Like I just want to hug you.
Not bad. Yes.
This has been a spectacular, and I'll tell you, Firas, this is not the last time I'm going to interview you. I'm just letting you know there's just so much, I think that so much beauty and so much wisdom and such perception and perspective that you bring to the table, that I think is necessary for these conversations, the Me Too movement, Black Lives Matter movement, activism, organizing, and being who you are and loving who you are. So I want to say thank you, Firas.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me again. Really.
Yeah. Is there anything you wanna say before we part? Anything in particular? Any message?
No, I really appreciate you creating space and time for us to have this conversation. I'm grateful for, you know, everyone who's listening, and I do want to invite people to, you know, to take. We are going through, like, this uprising is so incredible, and we are here for it. I think we're all here for it, whether or not we like it or not, which is like peace and love. But I do want to like invite people to take space for care and compassion towards themselves in this process. Being an activist, I know I've learned the hard way of what activist burnout looks like, and this is, you know, liberation takes consistent work towards creating the world we want to see, and that work takes time and emotional energy. And I do want to invite people to take that time for themselves and to lean into their practices as a means of, you know, creating their own liberation, and then by extension the liberation of our communities.
Thank you, Firas. And on that note, Thank you for joining us. And everyone, thank you for sharing your time and your space with both Firas and I. And of course, Firas, thank you so much for taking time out and sharing your breath, your heart, and your mind with us. It's quite an honor to hear you speak. I love it.
Thank
All
you.
right. Thank you everyone for joining.